Welcome to Roby's workshop. Valerie wants an organizer for her cosmetics drawer, and being Christmas, I think we can wrap that one. So come on inside, let me show you what we got going on.
A drawer organizer. All in one episode.
Well, I pulled out a number of pieces for the boneyards, and this is what I think I can make the stock work with. As a matter of fact, this piece right here is extra. Now, I'll mill this up with the rest of the stock, so I'll have that on hand in case something happens. But I only need, I got three 20-inch pieces, and the end over there and this will give me my 3 pieces there. I need 2 at 16, so I'm right here with that. And I need 6 at 14. And there you have it. This stock is going to be 1/2 inch thick, and I want it all squared up real nice. So what I'm going to do, we're going to cut this down to smaller, more manageable pieces, but we are only going to divide them in half until we get them to thickness. So there's a lot of work to be done. Let me run through the steps. This is going to be brief and short.
We'll start off at the miter saw and we'll rough out our basic lengths. Next we go to the jointer. I like to have one edge straight before I do any serious milling. The next step is to face joint one side. You always face joint with the bow up. You can tell which side is bowed by trying to rotate it on a flat surface. If it rotates, the bow is down. Make your marks, flip it over, and joint that side. Now that one side is flat, we'll get the other side parallel on the planer. It's back to the jointer. We need that straight edge to be perpendicular with our other 2 faces at this point. Note that I'm marking both corners. I'm taking off just a whisper here, and I need to make sure that both corners have been flattened out.
On all my boards, I have a flat face on 2 sides, and it's parallel, and a perpendicular side to each on each board. So I've just got one edge right here that needs work, and I've left it that way on purpose, primarily because this edge that I've left wild usually has a defect on it. This is a good example right here. Now when I take this defect out, I've got to be cognizant of the width of the board that remains. I have 2 1/4 inch clear I need on each of the 2 boards that come from this, and I need to take into account the blade width, and any other tolerances there are. Additionally, this particular board, I'm lucky here, I've got 2 defects. So I'm going to be taking these wider boards and these narrower ones, and I'm going to start trimming them back to where I get good clear material. So bear with me.
I'm cutting this piece of stock roughly to 5 inches. Recall that our overall width of board needs to be 2 1/4. This will give me a little extra to trim off after I divide that board in half. My fence is now at 2 1/4. I'll go ahead and cut those big boards in half, and I will recut all the smaller ones, putting a straight edge on the other side.
Well, everything's at 2 1/4, right where I want it, and you've probably noticed I have a little burning here. It may be time to get a new blade, or at least get that one really cleaned. I've cleaned it once already, but neither here nor there. I need to cut these to length, and it's off to the crosscut saw to do that.
Pieces that need to be the same length are cut at the same time.
The 4 corners get through dovetails. The inside joints, those are going to be sliding dovetails. Now, when you do through dovetails, you've got to keep in mind you've got 2 different bits to work with. I've got a straight cutting bit over there, and I have a dovetail bit over there. Now that's provided you don't get out a chisel. If you use a machine like this, that's what you're looking at. And the real trick is to get the depth right. Once you get the depth right, the joint will be both tight and it will be square on top, and that's what I've got here. Now, another thing that you've got to be careful of when you use a machine like this is what is the inside and the outside as it relates to how it positions itself in the machine. If you don't get that right, your project is going to get smaller.
I'm not going to comment on how the cuts are made on this machine because it's no longer being manufactured. Needless to say, there's plenty of dovetail machines out there. Follow the instructions and take your time. I've made all my marks and I know how to position them in the machine to make the cuts appropriately. You do the same and you shouldn't have any trouble.
Well, I'm getting set up over here at the router station for the first step of our sliding dovetails. These are where I want my sliding dovetails, and of course I've got out written right here, so this is the side that I want them on. Now this is pretty important because you don't want to be on the wrong side of this. This is even more important because this does have an in and an out, and of course this is the inside of the board. If I make a mistake and cut them here, I'm in a lot of trouble. But anyway, I have made these marks, and the whole objective is with the edges of the bit marked as shown, we want to set our stop right here such that when we come through, we make the appropriate cut. Now this is set to about half the height, 1/4 of an inch high. It's just a matter of pushing this board through. Now we have a uniform distance here. To get the same distance here, I just turn around the board. Now for consistency's sake, that's where the through dovetails come in really nice. These are cut exactly the same size. So if I put the board here and go through, and here and go through, I'm consistent from here to here. And that's what I'm looking for. So we're going to go ahead and make some cuts.
Should have changed the camera angle, but I wanted to illustrate this point. I am making a cut in one board. After that's finished, I'm going to take the other one and make the cuts in it as well. This keeps both sides very, very consistent. Not only that, having a good table on your router table that has a miter slot in it gives a whole new dimension for accuracy.
I have my fence back on the router again, and I've been making some adjustments. I've got a piece of scrap here on one of the through dovetails, and I have gotten a tight fit. Now keep in mind, when you make adjustments on this, you're not making adjustments for one cut, you're making it on two. You have to be able to go through this thing twice to get both sides of the dovetail. Right now, I've only done this with about 5 or 6 test cuts, and quite frankly, I'm pretty happy I got there this fast. Don't be discouraged. Once this is done and dialed in, it's great, but until then, you've got a lot of work to do to get this joint to come out just so. Well, we've had some good joinery, and I've enjoyed this. This has been a fun project so far, but right now we've got one more good joint, and it is going to be very tedious. It's this one right there. I have to make sure that this dovetail fits in just right, and it marries up exactly with this over here. There's not much room. There's not going to be a whole lot of give in this joint one way or the other. Additionally, I have to take a 1/2 inch off here before I can even trim that through dovetail. Now the router table is set up. We're getting ready to make this joint, and I have measured it as close as I can. That isn't the part that worries me. The part that worries me is getting that one right.
We've got our stop set in place, and I've got a little bit of pressure on the end there, but my miter gauge is pushing it through, and this gives me a very accurate cut. Now it's time to do the other side. Now it's time to make the crossboard a little shorter. It needs to be about a 1/2 inch shorter, but that's a 1/4 inch on both sides. If you make it on one side only, none of your other dovetails are going to match up. Make your marks and make them carefully, and cut with accuracy. You'll be fine.
Well, everything is going together better than expectations. Right now I have the perimeter set out here, and I have a clamping scheme. There's no glue here, not yet. I cut my paper down to keep my bench from catching it. Now there are 3 different types of clamps going on here. 1 is in this direction, 2 in this direction. That means the dovetails will be seated tight and correctly. But I also have some squares here. This is a very, very thin, narrow panel, and because of that, any pressure put on that isn't totally centered up on the joint is going to induce bowing into the board, and that's what I have here. These clamps right here are to help pull that out and to ensure it's square. Now I have 2 cauls underneath to get it up off the table so I don't have as much glue to clean up afterwards. But right now I'm just getting ready to get out a bottle of glue and a brush and start painting some joints.
It's time for a little assembly. Let's go ahead and marry up those dovetails. The first set of clamps go in parallel to the cawls. The reason for that is I need the bar to be as low as possible, and you'll see why here in just a minute. Well, the second set of clamps are going in, and it should be pretty apparent why the first set of clamps have to be low. The first set of clamps actually dictate where the bar is on the second set. Now, ordinarily that might not be a problem, but there's a third set of clamps that have to go in, and I need room for them. Well, my squares are in place, and you can see how tight it is. If I hadn't planned this out, I don't think I'd have been able to get all these in place at the same time.
Well, the dovetails have firmed up nicely, but now we need to start thinking about the partitions. I'll start with the big one and then follow up with the intermediates.
Don't be too stingy with the glue. If you stay inside the groove, you'll be fine. But go ahead and put glue in there. That glue will actually lubricate the joints so that your board will slide through easier. I was a little dry on some of these and it didn't help. Secondly, make sure you put pressure evenly on both sides. If one side goes down too fast, it will bind on the other side. That's not as pretty as I'd like it to be, but at the end of the day, the joint seated very well. A little extra glue on that would have probably helped. This is a better example of what you're hoping for. A smooth slide. And the last one goes in smoothly as well. Now, with all the partitions in place, it's time to give it some time to dry.
Well, at this point, I've broken it out of the clamps, and we're looking pretty good here. I like this. And we are very square. And with as much time and effort as we took, you would imagine we would be. Now, I think it's time to get out some sandpaper and clean up these rough edges. Well, I have taken the time and I have sanded down the whole thing with 120. That levels it out, gets rid of the mill marks. Now, the mill marks, if you put a raking light on them, they'll show up shiny. Now, that will take away, when you look at this, after you've got a finish on it, those mill marks, they're so subtle, but they will take away from the grain patterns. And it dulls the object down so much. You can't see anything anymore. So getting that 120 on everything to get rid of the mill marks, that's critical. So now that we've gotten rid of the mill marks, we have a lot of sanding left to go. The grits will go much faster, but we still have to take this sharp edge out. Now I've got a router bit with a 1/4 inch radius bit. We're going to take down inside and out all these corners. And then if the bearing right here on top that guides us on the surface, if that leaves a mark, we'll sand it out then. Don't do the bottom. Make sure you've got your top and bottom marked. So we made our pencil marks right there. The trick is take a good sharp chisel and just kind of roll it in the edge. It's already there.
This completes the round over that the router bit just can't get to. As a matter of fact, this is very necessary in my mind. Otherwise, it looks kind of bush league with a rounded corner that just doesn't get into the corners.
Well, I'm about tired of sanding, but everything on what I would call an inside surface has been sanded. This leaves the outside perimeter that has not been sanded. And that brings us to our next topic, which is the bottom. This is the bottom of the bottom. But since this piece is symmetrical, I can put this right here. I'm going to make marks on this surface. This will tell me where my screw holes need to go so that I hit the bottoms. Once I get it in place, I will trim off the edge with a flush cutting bit. Then we get back to the sanding, because at that point, we will want to clean up our mill marks.
The process starts with 3 holes. My marks will tell me where to make them. This is the only guesswork in the process. We have to line the holes up so that they center up with our boards. Once you're comfortable with the position, go ahead and drill the hole into the dividers through the hole that's in the bottom. Once you're lined up, go ahead and set your first 3 screws. Now you can pre-drill for the rest of the screws. Don't be stingy. You want lots of screws for a good tight fit.
Well, this came out really nice. I have a very clean, flush edge on that. And I used a big bit to do it. This is a 1/2 inch diameter bit with a bearing on it, so I get a flush cut. I like using big bits because the larger the diameter, the shallower the cut angle, and you get a much better cut with a shallow cut angle. We could have done it with a 1/4 inch bit, and it would not have been as good. But this is about as big as I want to put in this router. Now, the bottom is in place, and we are going to sand the perimeter at this point and get everything nice and cleaned up. And then the bottom comes off. I haven't sanded the bottom. I need to do that. But I don't want to finish it. I don't want the dividers and the bottom finished at the same time. If I do that, you're going to get a bead of finish or accumulation of finish in the corners and the bottom where you can't reach. As it is, this set of dividers needs to have a coat of finish put on without the bottom in place. It'll look much better.
Now that we're trimmed up, and before we take the bottom off, let's give it a good sanding. There's nothing pretty about that plywood edge, but at least it'll look like we thought about it.
For our finish, we're going with shellac, and there's a good reason for that. Shellac doesn't off-gas. Once it's finished, it's done. Your other finishes, like your polys and your oil bases, you'll be smelling that for a long time. And Valerie doesn't need to smell like a brand new drawer. That's not what she wants. So if you fill this thing up with cosmetics or anything that you put on your face, it could capture that smell and take it forward. So the other stuff is just really not an option. Now, I've taken my gun and I've already sprayed the bottom. Bottom came out great. I had hopes, albeit small, that I could get this, and I could probably get the outsides with it, but I can't get the insides. It's just too narrow. As a matter of fact, my first attempt, I had to come back and do a lot of brush work to clean this up. So the gun is not an option. We're going to be using a brush, and we're going to be brushing on the finish from here out. Well, the shellac has had time to dry, and shellac doesn't need much. And we're ready to assemble the bottom. Now, I have towels right here because I am going to be pressing down on this, and what I've got, I don't want damaged. Now, all these holes have been pre-drilled. I will take 1, 2, 3, and get just the nibs of these proud so they'll line up with these holes. Once those holes are lined up, everything else should go in place just fine.
There are a lot of screws, and that is intentional. While the partition assembly is stiff, the plywood is not, and I do not want any separation between the two. I thought about using just a couple of screws and some glue, and then pressing it in. Glue doesn't stick very well to most finishes, and it doesn't stick at all on shellac. So we'll go ahead and stick with this. We'll put in a lot of screws to ensure that we never have any separation between the partitions and the plywood bottom.
Well, we're assembled, and I think this looks great, especially for a project that was put together right out of the boneyard. We didn't buy any lumber for this particular project, so save your scraps. This is also a great project for practicing your joinery skills. We've got through dovetails on the corners, sliding dovetails in the interior, and rounded over edges. And we took the time to put that 45-degree rollover on each one of those edges with a chisel. That really gives it a polished look. Now, would I have done anything differently? I probably would have recessed this plywood into the box if it was going to be visible. This is going into a drawer, so nobody's going to see it. And I decided I wasn't going to borrow that level of trouble. Didn't have the time, and I didn't need to hide it. So the next thing about this project is the finish. This is shellac, and I like a shellac finish. I've got a number of pieces of furniture that I have shellac finish on, and it wears very, very well. However, it can be very difficult getting shellac in the interiors of all these corners without it running, without it blotching, is very difficult. And for this particular project, I would have chosen a wipe-on hard wax. My problem was I didn't have time. So if you plan this project a little bit better, think about a hard wax for this. And I think you'll be much happier with what you get as far as a finish is concerned, and certainly the amount of effort it takes to put it on. So with this, I'm going to call this episode a wrap. Most literally, this is going to get wrapped and put under the tree within the hour. So with that, I'll say Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you next time in Roby's workshop.